Hey guys, it's Celestia. Yeah, that's right, I shortened the intro because I'm a well-adjusted adult who's very capable of change. You might also notice that I've got a fancy new intro and outro now, which I'm praising myself for here despite having said that I'd have that ready like 3 videos ago, but they're here and they're done and that's something. Anyway, you guys voted for today's topic on Twitter, and that is art burnout. Specifically, how to avoid it and what to do when you can't. My advice here is coming from the specific perspective of an illustrator, but most of the points that I'll make are generally applicable to all kinds of creators, even if my wording is more tailored to drawing. But before we start with that, as always, let's quickly go over today's art. This piece was the first apparel design from the winter collection that I started working on in November, and I only realized about halfway through it that I should probably be recording the apparel pieces for SPEEDPAINTs to post once they're all released, which is why this one is just a time-lapse and not a proper screen recording. This was the only piece I made that mistake for, so the other apparel designs I'll be posting in videos will all be screen recorded properly like the last one you guys saw. Anyway, this is one of many pieces in which you'll unfortunately get to see me do 90% of the coloring before deciding that I don't like it and changing the palette completely. It's not the first time I've shown that aspect of my disaster process in a video, and it will inevitably not be the last either. I'd normally like to share some inspiration behind the piece here, but it pretty much just exists because I like drawing cute girls and I like retro TVs, and I thought it'd be a cool shirt. As you can see, my artistic process is complex and elaborate, so no questions, please. So, burnout. I don't know anyone at all in a creative career or otherwise that hasn't dealt with this, but I feel like for creators specifically, it can be harder to keep working while feeling burnt out than in other jobs, because creators, naturally, rely on their creativity to fuel their careers. For example, someone dealing with burnout in a non-creative job will still feel depressed, exhausted, overwhelmed, and often apathetic, but their actual ability to do their job itself isn't inhibited in and of itself. It's more that they're too burnt out to feel the will or energy to do it. And obviously this is fucking awful. None of this is intended to diminish the experiences that people working in non-creative jobs have with burnout. But for creators, our ability to create pretty much completely depends on our inspiration, our passion, and our ability to come up with new ideas to pursue. So, burnout taking all of those away can severely inhibit our ability to really do anything. We put so much of ourselves into what we create, and as a result, it's easy to spread ourselves too thin and overwork ourselves only to completely exhaust ourselves creatively. And when you get to that point, there's a lot of frustration that comes from feeling like you're out of ideas or you're too tired to come up with them, because not only do you have the mental health aspect of burnout to deal with, but now your work is at a standstill because you're struggling to come up with anything to do for it. Because of that, burnout for creators can feel both very overwhelming and very urgent, and those two things combined make it feel insurmountable sometimes. And trust me, I've been there. I'm no expert on getting through it or preventing it, but if nothing else, I can share the insights that I've gained from dealing with it many times and tell you guys what's worked for me when in this situation. So obviously we'll start with how to avoid art burnout because, stopping it is preferable than having to bring yourself out of the worst of it. The first thing is really just introspection, and by that I mean to try to know yourself and be conscious of yourself enough to recognize the warning signs that you're approaching burnout. For me, those signs tend to be restlessness, an overwhelming urge to avoid the projects that are causing the burnout, feeling like I really just want to draw, but drawing a total blank when I actually sit down to do it, worsening insomnia, and not being able to stop thinking about the projects I need to complete, no matter what I'm doing. But everyone is completely different with this. Even the me from a few years ago had completely different warning signs than who I am now. So just try to be very conscious of your behaviors and feelings so that you can hopefully get ahead of burnout before it gets too bad. Another big thing is to try to separate your work and your passion. Pursuing a career in your creative field often means that the line between what you create for work and what you create for you is blurred pretty significantly, and it's really important to try to divide the two, at least for the most part, and make sure that there's a healthy balance of both in your life. Whenever I'm doing way more commissions or big projects than I am making art that I want, I find myself getting way more burnt out way faster. So when possible, I like to have at least one project or piece in progress that I'm doing just for me, because I like it and I want to, alongside whatever I'm doing professionally at that time. For me at least, it helps me feel sort of creatively rejuvenated, because I'm getting that fulfillment and satisfaction that comes with drawing fun, self-indulgent stuff for the sake of just enjoying it. It's like I'm kind of refilling my creative energy at the same rate as whatever I'm doing for work is depleting it, so it balances out. Similarly, working as an artist can make it really hard to shut off from your work. Especially if you do it from home like me, you're pretty much surrounded by it at all times, even when you're not actually sitting down to work for the day. 90% of the time I'm watching TV or a movie or just trying to relax, I also have my iPad out and I'm working on shit at the same time, because that's both the blessing and the curse of having your work materials readily available all the time. But at a regular job, you have a schedule and concrete hours, and when you get off work, you're done for the day. You go home and do whatever you want to do, and you're out of that work mindset. but creators, myself included, often struggle to be done for the day and get out of that work mindset because it's so easy to just keep working. This is one big contributor to burnout that I have not gotten past yet at all, but some things that have helped me are trying to keep my work in my home office and limit the amount of work that I do outside of it, which kind of keeps me from associating my whole apartment with work, and enabling screen time on my iPad so that it tells me when I've done 8 hours of work that day, and I can try to convince myself that that's probably enough. Something else that's helped me prevent burnout is keeping myself really, really organized, which is something I never used to do. I used to get burnt out really easily because I got overwhelmed by feeling like there was so much that I needed to do that I didn't even know where to begin with it. And learning to make organized to-do lists has helped me break everything down into achievable tasks. It's less overwhelming, and it helps me to not overwork myself, because I have a concrete number of things that I actually have to get done in a day, and I know when to stop. Taking small, regular breaks is also really helpful. Even just designating one day off for yourself per week can help you wind down and get out of that overworking cycle before it starts. And the more regularly you do that, the less likely you are to get too caught up in your work and subsequently burnt out. I found that what I tended to do before was work and work and work until I completely ran out of energy, and then I'd just be so exhausted that I'd take a big, gigantic break where all I did was play Animal Crossing and wouldn't draw at all. And taking those huge breaks where I just didn't draw at all just made the burnout worse, because there was pretty much nothing that was inspiring me creatively anymore, and therefore nothing to motivate me to start drawing again. Even if I do take a longer break these days, I try to do even just a small doodle once a day during that time to keep myself motivated, because that keeps my energy and willpower up for when I am ready to start working again. This next tip is more limited to art specifically, and it's to keep a sketchbook that's just for you. This one relates to the last tip in that it's really helpful to draw in these sketchbooks between projects and commissions and other commitments. It's really relaxing to just draw something that you're not going to post anywhere. It's not for anyone but you. And just let yourself enjoy your art for what it is without feeling like you have to meet a certain standard or please a certain audience. Next is to try to be as reasonable and realistic as possible with your expectations for yourself. It can be really tempting to try to overwork your way into success. Just work harder than the competition, put out more content than the competition. Push yourself to your limit every single day to try to set yourself apart and get where you want to be faster. But that mentality kind of comes with the idea that eventually you'll get to a point where you won't need to be pushing yourself that hard anymore. That you'll be successful enough that you can just chill out a little bit more. But that's really not how it goes. By overworking yourself constantly and taking on more than you can handle, you're setting a base standard for what you're willing to do that will follow you throughout your career. If you build a following based on posting tons of content all the time with no breaks, that's what your entire following is going to expect from you indefinitely. If you take on huge projects with short deadlines all the time, your employers will expect that of you consistently. You'll get the outcome that you're working for eventually, yeah, but at the cost of your mental health. Slow and steady might not be super appealing when all you want is fast results, but you'll never be able to keep up the pace you're working at if you're constantly burnt out and exhausted. It's really, really important to be realistic about your schedule, your deadlines, the expectations you have for yourself, and the amount of work that you take on, because those things build a foundation on which your career is built, and it needs to be a sustainable one that you can maintain without losing your mind, being majorly unhappy, or giving up on what you're doing. Finally, the last thing I find helpful both in preventing burnout and dealing with it at its worst is to consume content that inspires you. Watch videos of creators that you look up to, look at what your favorite artists are posting, just surround yourself with things that motivate you. When I'm feeling burnt out and uninspired, the one thing that has never once failed to bring me inspiration and passion again is looking at art that makes me want to improve my own, or content that inspires ideas, or looking at creators that I look up to who are where I want to be and doing what I want to do. If you can get yourself excited about your own future and the things that you want to make, that's a stepping stone to getting out of a creative rut. Even if you're just planning content you want to make in the future and not actually making it, that's still big. That's actually one of my favorite parts, honestly. I love putting stuff in my bullet journal. If it gives me an excuse to write a list, I'm instantly pumped about it. Anyway, moving on. So those are the best ways I know how to avoid art burnout, but the bottom line here is that sometimes you just can't avoid it. Whether it be because you're too busy to take breaks and you just don't have the time to make shit for yourself and relax, or you're a naturally work-obsessed person like me who has a tendency to chronically work yourself to the bone, or you're doing everything right to take care of yourself and avoid burnout and you still find yourself running on empty. Burnout pretty much affects everyone, and it's kind of just a part of dedicating yourself to your work. You're not always going to be able to keep it at bay, and these are the best ways that I know to bring yourself out of it when you've pretty much depleted your energy and creativity. First of all, try to remind yourself that burnout is temporary. I know it can feel like you've kind of hit a wall that you're never going to get past, that everything is just too much and you don't have the energy to keep giving your all to what you're making, that you've just got nothing left to give, and that feels anything but temporary. but it will pass. It always does, and it is going to get better. Don't let burnout make you give up on what you're doing. Just use it as a reason to reevaluate how you're doing what you're doing that's led it to become so draining for you. On that note, finding out what exactly is so draining for you is a huge part of overcoming burnout. Burnout is the result of a problem, not the problem itself, and you can't solve it without getting to the root of what's actually causing it. Are you working too much? Are you not enjoying the work that you're doing? Did you take on too many projects? Are you expecting too much of yourself? There's a million things that can cause it, and once you identify what is causing it for you, you can lessen the impact and significance of those things in your work. You can't always stop doing those things altogether. I mean, for example, I find commissions really draining, but I like to be able to afford food and coffee, so I need to keep taking them. But I enforce a strict limit on the number of them that I'll accept at any given time, so that I still have time for other aspects of my work that bring me joy and don't drain me. Sometimes the things that make you feel burnt out are just an inevitable part of what you do, but there are always ways to make them less stressful, do them less often, or find alternatives. If one of the things contributing to it is that you're working on a big thing that feels overwhelming and impossible to finish, try to break it down into small, achievable tasks like I mentioned before. It helps you establish a real, tangible timeline for your work, which helps fight the feeling that you won't have enough time or you'll never get it done, and it makes it feel less like one big, impossible thing and more like a lot of smaller, more easily accomplished things. It also gives you some satisfaction and relief when you can check off some of those things from the list. When you're working on a big project, it can feel like you pretty much get no satisfaction or payoff until the whole thing is done. And therefore it kind of feels like all the work that you put into it until it's done is just a drop in the bucket, which is not something that keeps you motivated to keep working on it. If you break it down into small tasks, you always end the day feeling like you've accomplished something, even if the whole thing isn't done. The next thing is to try to remind yourself why you're doing what you're doing. Try to remember what you love so much about your art or whatever you create, what your goals are, what you want to achieve, and the parts of it that make you happy. Look back on the things you've already accomplished. Look at work that you're really proud of that makes you want to make more like it. And just try to find joy in your art, even if you can't find joy in the thing that you're working on at that time. If you can and have time, also try to take a step back from what you're working on. Whether it be to work on something else, go for a walk, have a bath, watch a movie, whatever. When you're feeling overwhelmed, especially if you've been working on the same thing for a really long time, it can help a lot to just stop working on that thing and come back to it with fresh eyes. I know for me, when I'm drowning in work and losing the energy to finish it all by the minute, it feels like the only way I'll get it done is to just sit down and finish it all at once. I always feel like a small break is never gonna do anything, because when you're that exhausted, it pretty much feels like nothing is gonna make you less tired. And, I'd rather spend that time making progress on the project. But more often than not, if I force myself to take those small breaks, I actually do feel a significant difference by the time I get back to it. It's like when people tell you that a half-hour nap is better for you than a 4-hour nap. You know that physiologically, they're probably right, but it sounds fucking fake, and the evil you know is safer than the evil you don't. And in this case, the evil I know is a very warm pile of blankets and no alarm. But seriously, it does help. Take the half-hour nap. These are just some of the things that I've found helpful, and I hope that some of them can help you guys too. And when you inevitably do find yourself recovering from burnout, you'll honestly be much better off for having gone through it, because you'll know yourself better. You'll know the triggers that caused and worsened it so that you can avoid them. You'll know the things that helped either prevent it or get you through it, so that you can do them again and even integrate them into your everyday life. And you'll have a bunch of tips to put into a YouTube video. And I know that a lot of this is easier said than done. I mean, I can say all this pretty easily, and I still just took on a gigantic project, and I still have unreasonable expectations for myself. But even slow progress is progress when it comes to improving your outlook on your work and your mental health, so it's worth trying. Thank you guys for watching. If you have any tips for burnout that have helped you, please leave them in the comments. Like I said, I'm not an expert on this by any means, and it's definitely something that I still struggle with, and I'm always trying to learn better ways to handle it. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. All jokes aside, it really does help me out, and it motivates me to make more content and better content. If you want a say in what I talk about next, you can vote over on my Twitter poll linked in the description. Stay safe, and I'll see you in my next video.